My name is Deborah Rogers. I live in Fort Worth. This journey started for me over a year ago. I think to my knowledge, I'm the first person in North Texas to do air testing near a gas drilling facility. So I've provided testing results to TCEQ on numerous occasions. Chesapeake Energy moved in the end of April of this year and began drilling the first of what is apparently going to be 12 wells 600 feet from my home. At the beginning of May, I called TCEQ because the odors were so egregious. They sent an inspector out. It was interesting. The odors lasted all day on the hike and bike trail. People were complaining about it. It runs right behind the pad site. I called finally about 4:30 in the afternoon. TCEQ showed up at 9:30 at night, but they called me first. And they said, we're on our way. And I walked outside, and it was still, the stench was overwhelming. And about 10 minutes later, it disappeared completely. And that's when I realized that these operators on these pad sites can control emissions somehow. I don't know how they did it, but the odors disappeared immediately. TCEQ then showed up about 10 minutes later, and of course there was nothing to smell. I told them that I would be placing a canister if the odors returned. I got up the next morning. The odors were just as strong as they had been the day before. I waited about 48 more hours for the wind speeds to die down, and I set a canister out. I set it to the side of the pad site, and we ended up with sulfur compounds about 250 times what is normal for ambient urban air, according to EPA. We had benzene hovering around long-term ESLs. We had the usual, the xylenes, the toluenes, ethylbenzene. It's the same signature of compounds every time. I sent these testing results off to you, Tony, and Alyssa, and Dr. Honeycutt, and I never received any response from anyone. Chesapeake moved in a few weeks ago, began drilling again, and this time I set the canister out. I didn't bother to call I need to go back. TCEQ, after I set the canister out, came out and used one of their, I called again and complained. They used the toxic vapor analyzer. They said the highest level they could record on my property was 1.3 parts per million, and therefore they could not place a canister. And you heard the results. Obviously, the toxic vapor analyzers are not sensitive enough. They're not designed to test ambient urban air or ambient air, and they can be used as a screening tool. But I do think that the 5 parts per million is way, way too high before setting out a canister, because we clearly had toxic chemicals in the air, in spite of the fact that they only reported 1.3. A few weeks ago, they moved in again, drilled another well. Again, the odors were overwhelming. I placed another canister. I got the results back the other day. This time I placed a canister directly downwind in one of my back pastures. Benzene, 62.4. Ethylbenzene, 64.7. Styrene, 207. Toluene, 59.4. Trimethylbenzene ethyltoluene, 8.3. Trimethyl 1, 2, and 4, trimethylbenzene 25.3, xylenes 143, sulfur compounds 18.1, 17.6, 10, 25, very, very high levels of toxins. I feel like my home is being systematically poisoned, and I do not think that's too strong of a term to use. And no one will help. I've heard a lot of talk about the issue of we must protect jobs and versus ensuring the public health, the protection of public health. And I'd like to address that as well tonight. Representative Cook made the following quote recently, which I found of interest, and that is a statement made time and again by elected officials, state agencies, and industry in North Texas with regard to gas drilling and its implications for our health. He stated that his goal is to ensure citizens' public health is protected without causing a financial hardship for the employees and families who depend on jobs from Texas' energy sector. We've all heard this argument many times, but I find it to be one of the weakest. This argument hints at a rather disturbing fact that a balance of toxins and population can somehow be found which will be acceptable. But who will be the sacrificial population? Whose children will be put at greater risk for leukemia for benzene exposure? Whose families will be burdened with higher levels of formaldehyde, which, by the way, the industry's own study in Fort Worth found the highest levels of formaldehyde that scientists have seen any place on the planet outside of Brazil, right on the east side of Fort Worth near the Lake Arlington compressor station. No violations found. Is that truly the political statement that our elected officials and agencies intend to make? Is it truly the public relations message that industry wants to employ? Must it come down to the luck of the draw that wherever the gas company chooses to place its pad site, those residents nearest and will be at greatest risk and thus sacrificed? Tony mentioned the clause. 15,000 wells have been drilled or permitted in North Texas thus far, and none of those will have to come under the new rules, according to TCEQ, at this point. If industry insists on using this argument that jobs will be lost if they are asked to change their current production model, then they are essentially telling us that they are incapable of producing their product and making money if they must use protective technology. Therefore, we, the residents, should shoulder the potential for catastrophic illness in order to make their product more economically attractive. This gives a whole new meaning to the phrase, your money or your life. If we take Representative Cook at his word, then he is effectively saying that industry cannot maintain jobs unless it is allowed some leeway in what it is being asked to do in order to protect the health and safety of the residents in North Texas. What is even more disturbing is that our elected officials and state agencies are willing to determine which populations are sacrificed rather than imposing protective measures which are cost-effective and which would still allow the extraction of minerals but mitigate the potential for catastrophic illness. This is a huge red flag. Something very clearly is wrong with this production model. I would suggest that it may be time for industry and our state agencies to engage in some serious revisionary thinking. It is absurd to think that such an industrial activity as gas drilling with its known toxic processes and byproducts would be allowed to occur near our homes, schools, and offices without the use of protective equipment. Unfortunately, that is precisely what has been allowed to happen here today. It's time that we insist on more controls. Thank you.